The discussion comes up every year with the talent level of NFL teams, as tank talks tend to carry easily once we figure out which teams are in the run-in for the first overall pick. Oftentimes, these teams get compared to previous bad teams as well, but there is no real consensus for what past NFL team is really the worst team through the years. Well, today we're going to find out. Before we go any further, I want to shout out Empire for whose video about finding the worst college football team inspired this video, and I took his original formula and altered it slightly to better fit the NFL. So subscribe to Empire, he does great work in college football, and subscribe over here as well, it will be greatly appreciated. Let's start by ironing out what formula we're going to be using. The formula looks like this, and this reads a team's offensive efficiency times by a defensive efficiency multiplier with the team's special team efficiency added to it, then times it by the win percentage plus 1, and then times it by the strength of opposing seeds. Offensive efficiency is gauged through a team's offensive yards per game, added with the points per game, and then that total is divided by the amount of offensive turnovers per game they committed. The defensive efficiency multiplier is the average of opponents' yards per game divided by the team's yards allowed per game, then times by the turnovers per game the defense forced. Special teams efficiency takes into consideration a team's average yards per punt, yards per kick return, and yards per punt return. Added those together, then times it by the field goal percentage. Win percentage is the games won divided by games played. Then you add 1 to provide weight to the other variables. Strength of opposing seed is gauged through the average seed of opponents divided by the number of games. To find the seed of opponents in order to find the average was something. I ranked the teams into a seeding that looked at win totals, playoff seeding, and point differential, with playoff seeding and point differential being ways to decide tiebreakers within the win totals. Now, with all that being said, this video is going to be discussing teams that fall within the 2002 and 2020 seasons, for the fact that within those years there is a consistent 32 teams and 16 games throughout the whole data set, and thus makes the comparisons equal. There's also a win total limit. Any teams with more than 6 wins on the season are not a part of the data set. So with all that being said, here's the amount of times each team appeared within the data set, and the final preference I want to make is that this is all for fun and not an end-all be-all list. There's 190 teams within this data set. I'm not going to be able to cover them all. If you want to see a part 2 to this, I will gladly cover more teams, but let's dive right into the ones I'm covering for this video. The first team we'll look at is the 2008 Green Bay Packers. This was Aaron Rodgers' first year as a starter in the NFL. They finished 6-10 and come in as the third best team in the data set with a score of 742.307, an offensive efficiency score of 287.476, thanks to them averaging about 26 points per game and 351 yards per game. It was brought down due to Rodgers throwing a career-high 13 interceptions that season, but it was still a sign of things to come for the future of the Packers under Aaron Rodgers. What really stood out was the special teams efficiency being the second lowest for the Packers, thanks to a field goal percentage of 79%. The defense averaged just about 1.75 turnovers per game, giving up about 334 yards per game, while also giving up a 74% conversion rate on fourth down, which ranked them 30th in the league. But they still were nearly left off the data, but due to 2 overtime losses, one to Tennessee and one to Chicago, is what kept them on the data set, with that Chicago game seeing Mason Crosby miss a field goal and having one blocked. The 13th best team in the data is the 2004 Washington Commanders. Finishing tied for last in the NFCs with a 6-10 record, the Commanders finished with the best score of NFC's teams for this season. Offensive and special team score decreased slightly from 2003, thanks to averaging less yards per game and points per game, and a 70% field goal percentage. The schedule was the easiest out of teams within the 2004 dataset, with an average opponent seed of 18.375. The defense actually improved from 2003, thanks to a 5th overall pick Sean Taylor coming in and hitting the ground running with his play. Starting in 13 games and getting 78 tackles, 15 pass breakups, 4 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and a sack, his play allowed the defense to improve from 338.25 yards allowed per game to 267 yards allowed per game. He was an incredible talent that was taken far, far too soon. The 2018 Buffalo Bills was the rookie season of Josh Allen and the last season of LaShawn McCoy in Buffalo. Although that specific season was a worse season compared to 2017, in the long run it turned out fine. The Bills averaged about 17 points per game that season while also averaging 2 turnovers a game. The defense was a great unit for them, having the highest score amongst 2018 teams within the data, being the only team with a defensive efficiency above 2. The schedule was about middle of the road with an average opponent seeding at 15.5. It was a 6-10 season and the last season that Buffalo finds themselves a part of the data as Josh Allen developed into a consistent MVP candidate, and no one truly looks at this season as one worse than some of the teams ranked higher than them on the final list, including the 2020 Carolina Panthers and 2020 New York Giants. Steelers haven't had a losing season in 21 years, and the last time they did was 2003. The year that led to them getting Ben Roethlisberger and 2 Super Bowls, as best summarized through the offensive shortcomings on the season, averaging 1.75 turnovers per game and a special teams unit that was average to below average thanks to the 72% field goal percentage. A 6-10 season led by 11th year Tommy Maddox that nearly missed being a part of the data, but a terrible fourth quarter in an overtime loss to Baltimore in the final week of the season punched their ticket. This game as a whole was disastrous for Pittsburgh, with the Steelers losing the turnover battle by 3 and going 3 and out in the first drive of overtime. 2007 was a turning point for the Atlanta Falcons, as during the season they would fire the head coach they just hired, Bobby Petrino. And in the season 4-12 and still ranking as the best team from the 2007 dataset, the Falcons had a forgettable season that mainly gets remembered because due to the poor performance, they were able to build the future bright, bringing in Mike Smith to be the head coach and drafting franchise QB Matt Ryan in the following draft. It was this sort of gap year between the Michael Vick and Matt Ryan era in Atlanta. It was clear the plan for this season was to be one of the lower tier teams, as Joey Harrington was their starter, and as a Dolphin fan, I know how bad Joey Harrington can be as a starting quarterback. But again, this is one of those seasons that gets forgotten about despite it being one of the lesser tiered seasons, but purely because the future was bright in Atlanta immediately afterwards. First year after the departure of Brett Favre in Minnesota is a complex season for the Vikings. Comparing it to the 2010 season, the Vikings offense actually improved from the previous season, both through the offensive efficiency score and in league rankings, going from a score of 143.784 to 215.962. And in the league rankings, they went from 29th and 23rd in points and yards to 19th and 18th. This is thanks to a massive cut down in turnovers with the departure of Favre, but both the defense and special teams decreased for Minnesota in the same ways. Defensive efficiency score went from 1.767 to 1.474, and rankings that saw the defense go from a top 10 unit to a bottom 5 unit. The lesser play from the defense is what led to the 3-13 record, but the lesson of turnovers also means that this team ranks higher than the 2010 counterparts, even if only by a few spots. 2002 was a turning point in the NFL. It introduced the new Houston franchise in the Texans, and it set up the current divisional alignment we have today. It is tough for expansion teams to find success early, and that showed in the Texans. After a win in their inaugural game against the Cowboys, the Texans would lose 5 straight with David Carr behind center, and the offensive line just couldn't block anyone as Carr was sacked 76 times that season. Though he also struggled when he was staying upright, throwing 15 interceptions compared to 9 touchdowns. The defense, however, was surprisingly solid, giving up the least amount of yards per game of teams within the dataset for 2002, and having the highest rated defensive efficiency score as well for that data. If only they had a proper offensive line to go with that defense, who knows what the Texans could have looked like in the early years. Much like the Steelers, Baltimore after the season would quickly turn things around and get a Super Bowl with the QB they selected after the season in Joe Flacco. But this season is interesting on its own. The offense averaged the most turnovers per game out of any team within the 2007 dataset with 2.5 turnovers per game. They started the season 4-2, then would proceed to lose 9 straight, including an overtime loss to Cleveland in a dogfight, and an overtime loss to Miami. That was the Dolphins' only win that season, thanks to a missed field goal in the opening drive of overtime. The defense was solid like the Ravens defense always is during those years, but head coach Brian Billick just couldn't fix the offense and was let go after the season for John Harbaugh. I have a whole video that goes into detail about the 2019 Dolphins and their fire sale that took place and what came from it, so go check it out if you haven't already after this one. The 2019 Chargers are very slightly worse than Miami was this season based on the final rankings, with the difference only being 0.614. And the similarities between these two teams is scary, as very minor things separate them, and scores differ by such small margins. There's a reason they've been compared since this moment. But whereas Miami was expected to be a poor team due to the fire sale, the Chargers were coming off of a divisional loss to Baltimore. They were expected to win around 10 games and were tied for 8th in the Super Bowl odds, but averaging nearly 2 turnovers per game and under 1 forced turnover a game certainly doesn't help. What to talk about when discussing the 2010 Panthers? Well, their offensive shortcomings is certainly first on the list. one of the lowest points per games of any team in the data set with 12.25, and the offensive efficiency score sits at 143.784. Besides that, they're a pretty solid team, and that explains how them bringing in Cam Newton turned the team around in the caliber as it did. Solid QB/offensive play was the missing piece, since they also averaged over 2 turnovers per game, with rookie Jimmy Clausen leading the way. This was also the last season with John Fox coaching the team, bringing in the Ron Rivera era for Carolina. That was also a key reason why they made a 2015 Super Bowl appearance. If you thought Carolina's offense was bad in 2010, well, the 2009 Rams would like you to hold their beer. An offense that averaged just about 11 points per game and just over 2 turnovers per game, they have an offensive efficiency score that's less than Carolina, and a defense that also comes in as worse with a score of 1.136. This is due to the defense underperforming in comparison to how the offensives they played against performed. The bright spot is the special teams unit was solid, but they couldn't even get a franchise QB in the draft, as Sam Bradford was shown to be a bust in the following seasons, so it was a 1-15 season that was all for naught. No, we are not yet at the end, but we are entering the bottom 10 as the 2006-2008 Detroit Lions find themselves as the 9th worst team since 2002. 0-4 in one-score games, including a 2-point loss to the Vikings, thanks to Orlovsky running out the back of the end zone. Offense and defense both are below average, with defense being well below average. But the special teams unit was actually the second best special teams unit on the 2008 data set, and they played one of the tougher schedules from the 2008 data as well. They got their franchise QB with Matthew Stafford and found some success with him, plus were able to use him to bring in Jared Goff, which has the Lions looking their best. Overall, for as much as the season gets joked about, it was a season that led to a bright future, all things considered. Not the 0-16 season for Cleveland, but the year prior, they did go 1-15 and find themselves as the 8th worst team since 2002. The offense actually wasn't too bad, just slightly below average. However, the defense was terrible that season, giving up nearly 40 more yards per game than the opposing offenses gained, and averaged less than 1 turnover per game, meaning their defensive efficiency score was 0.74. Also had the worst field goal percentage of any team from the 2016 data set. They did have 2 overtime losses, one against Miami where they missed 3 field goals, including what would have been a game winner at the end of regulation. And the other overtime loss was the final week of the season against Pittsburgh, where they also missed a field goal in the 4th and had the ball first in overtime, but it was a 17-play drive that ended in a field goal. And this was after the overtime rules changed, where it was first score wins, now only first touchdown wins. Cleveland was bad this year. We have entered the top 3, and to start things off is the 2012 Kansas City Chiefs with a final rating of 197.075. A 2-win season where the offense was putting up just over 13 points per game while turning the ball over just over 2 times per game. This Chiefs offense was rough, led by Matt Castle in his final season with KC before they parted ways with 2 years left on his 6-year contract. The defense wasn't any better, averaging just under 1 turnover per game while giving up extra yards than expected per game. This would get KC the first overall pick in a very non-QB friendly class, so they would select Eric Fisher to be the cornerstone tackle of the future for KC as they brought in Alex Smith during the offseason. The second worst team since 2002 belongs to the 06 Oakland Raiders, by far the absolute worst offense of any team on this data set, thanks to them averaging 10.5 points per game and damn near 3 turnovers a game. Their offensive efficiency score is 89.283. The defense was actually solid, but nothing can save that offense into being a solid team for any season. It doesn't help that the special teams was mediocre thanks to a 72% field goal percentage. This team would get the first overall pick and select Jamarcus Russell, which did not work out for them by any means. This team was bad, and the only reason they aren't the worst team is because they won 4 games that year and the defense was solid. But even then, they were still a strong consideration for being one of the worst teams in the NFL. Now for the worst team since 2002, and they were the worst team by a wide margin. That team is none other than the 0-16 2017 Cleveland Browns, with a final score of 151.831. While their offense is better than the 06 Raiders, it's not by much, since they still average just under 15 points per game and turn the ball over about 2.5 times per game. They were much worse defensively, having a defensive efficiency score of 0.744. They forced turnovers as the worst average of any team from the data set with 0.8125 times per game, and giving up about 28 more yards than expected. Special teams also wasn't great with a 75% field goal percentage, but 2 overtime losses is what kept them in this spot, with the overtime loss against the Titans being the closest, and they threw 3 interceptions in that game. This team by far is the worst team, and it only led to a single playoff win due to the Browns owners deciding to move on from the player they selected with the pick they got from this season in Baker Mayfield. So much can be said about this season that it might get its own video at some point, but for now, it comes in as the worst team since 2002 in the NFL. Well, there you have it. I have been working on this video in the background for multiple months, as it took a while to make, with the research and data analysis being a bulk of the time, but I'm proud of this and hope you all enjoyed as well. Again, make sure to check out Empire since they inspired this video massively with his worst college football team video. So subscribe to him and subscribe here as well. During the offseason, these more so scripted video essays are the primary content. But during the actual season, we do go live with play-by-plays for the NFL and even the UFL when that's going on. So stick around for those. Also some standard football season coverage as well on this channel. Stick around, greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have yourselves a damn good one. Peace.